This is fake. You'll never get away with this. No one important would ever sign a scholarship for you too. Patricia Lane's voice rose across the open floor of the bank, stern and unwavering. The papers in her hand trembled slightly before she tore them apart in one harsh motion. Zara and Zoe Coleman stood before her desk, silent. Zara, an 11-year-old with calm intelligence and quiet poise, did not flinch even as the papers fell to the ground. Zoe, her twin, stood beside her, her arms folded, her chin lifted in defiance. Both wore matching mint green hoodies, an innocent symbol of their shared confidence that had now been mistaken for arrogance in Patricia's eyes. "I've seen this kind of thing before," Patricia continued sharply. "You kids think you can print something off the internet, come here and claim you've earned a scholarship? This isn't some game." Zoe's jaw tightened. "It's not fake," she said quickly, her tone sharp but controlled. "We worked for it. It's from Crestview University." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Crestview University?" she repeated, her voice mocking. "Do you even know what that institution is? They don't give scholarships to just anyone. I know how this goes. You bring in fancy letters hoping people won't notice the difference. But I do." Zara's voice was quiet but steady. "You could have checked before tearing it." Patricia leaned forward across her desk. "Don't tell me how to do my job, young lady. I've been here for 15 years. I can tell real from fake." The word struck hard, but Zara didn't move. She simply breathed and held her ground. The silence that followed was short-lived as Patricia lifted her chin and addressed them again. "Now, I'll be keeping a note of this incident. Fraud is serious business. You could get in a lot of trouble for pretending to have university scholarships." Zoe took a step forward, her voice trembling with anger. "We're not pretending. You don't even know us." Patricia gave a cold laugh. "I don't need to know you to recognize when someone's lying." The harshness in her tone made a few heads turn. Bank customers waiting nearby shifted uncomfortably. A man near the counter lowered his phone, pretending to scroll while watching. Two women exchanged uneasy glances. One young employee, Daniel, sat at a nearby desk and froze mid-typing. He wanted to speak, but fear and hierarchy sealed his lips. Patricia ignored the growing attention and went on, louder than necessary. "You children need to learn that you can't cheat your way into things you don't belong in. Crestview University doesn't hand out scholarships for free, and it certainly doesn't." She paused, her lips tightening as she bit back her next words. Zoe's voice broke the pause. "Doesn't what?" Patricia's eyes darted to the side, avoiding the stares of the few people now watching. "Never mind," she said, but her tone carried the meaning her silence had failed to hide. Zara's voice remained gentle, but every word carried weight. "We just wanted to open an account for the scholarship. You didn't have to do this." Patricia shook her head, her expression full of disdain. "I'm doing my job. You two came in here with falsified documents. That's a crime." Zoe crossed her arms tighter. "We're telling the truth." Patricia smirked. "Then you won't mind if I call the authorities and let them decide." Zoe's eyes widened. "You're going to call the police on us?" "If that's what it takes to teach some respect, yes." The room seemed to shrink. Conversations around the lobby quieted. A few whispers spread like ripples. Daniel's fingers hovered over his keyboard, hesitant. "Ms. Lane," he said softly, "maybe we could verify the paperwork before?" Patricia snapped her head toward him. "Daniel, do I look like I need your advice?" He looked down quickly. "No, ma'am." "Then stay out of this." She turned back to the twins. "You see? Even my staff know when someone's trying to pull a stunt. Now either you tell me who forged these or—" Zoe interrupted. "No one forged anything. You're being unfair." "Unfair?" Patricia's laugh was bitter. "You think life's supposed to be fair? Let me tell you something, young lady, this world doesn't hand things to people who don't work for them. Maybe your parents should have taught you that before sending you here with fake documents." Zara's heart pounded, but she held her sister's arm to stop her from saying more. "We earned them," she said softly, her voice calm but shaking slightly. "You just don't want to believe it." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Enough. Both of you out of my bank before I make a formal complaint." Zoe took a deep breath, her small fists tightening. You shouldn't talk to us like that. Patricia slammed the torn papers on her desk. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. You walk in here dressed like this, claiming something that's impossible, and you expect me to treat you like customers? Zara looked at her steadily. We are customers. Or at least we were supposed to be. Patricia's voice rose again, loud enough for everyone to hear. You are two little girls wasting my time with lies. The sound carried across the entire bank floor. A few people gasped quietly. Someone muttered, that's too much. Another whispered, those poor kids. But no one dared intervene. Daniel couldn't stay silent anymore. Ms. Lane, he said again, this time louder, maybe you should slow down. They're just children. Patricia turned sharply. Daniel, I said enough. He froze, shame washing over his face. The girl stood still. The quiet after her outburst felt heavy. Zoe's eyes glistened. You don't even know who signed those letters, she said softly. Patricia laughed again, sharp and dismissive. No one important would ever sign a scholarship for you two. That's what I know. A new voice spoke from behind them, calm and deep. Is that so? The girls turned slightly. Patricia's posture stiffened as a man approached, a tall, well-dressed figure with quiet authority. Dr. Elijah Coleman, a dignified man in his mid-40s, walked toward them with composed steps. His presence seemed to change the air, though no one could explain why. He carried himself with the ease of someone used to respect, yet he offered none of it to himself. Is there a problem here? His voice was soft, steady, and polite. Patricia folded her arms, ready to justify herself. Sir, I'm handling this. These young girls tried to open an account with falsified documents. I've already destroyed them to prevent further misuse. Dr. Coleman's gaze moved from his daughters to the torn papers on the desk. You destroyed them? He asked, his tone quiet. Yes, Patricia said confidently. They were obviously fake. Crestview University doesn't hand out scholarships like that. He nodded slowly as if processing her words. You seem quite sure of that. Patricia smirked. I am. It's common sense. Dr. Coleman reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small leather folder. He opened it and placed a gold-embossed identification card on her desk. Then perhaps your common sense could use some checking, he said mildly. Patricia leaned closer. Her eyes moved over the name on the card, and froze. Dr. Elijah Coleman, Dean of Crestview University. Her face drained of color. The room went silent again, only the faint hum of the air conditioning audible. Daniel's mouth opened slightly in disbelief. The few bystanders who had been whispering now exchanged wide-eyed glances. Elijah's gaze was steady but not angry. I'm the one who signed those scholarships, he said quietly. For my daughters, Zara and Zoe Coleman. Patricia's lips parted, but words failed her. The torn letters in the trash behind her desk seemed to glare back at her, mocking the confidence she'd worn minutes before. Zoe stood taller now, her voice low but clear. You said no one important would ever sign them. Zara's tone followed, calm and firm. That's our father. Patricia stumbled over her words. I didn't realize. Elijah stopped her with a gentle raise of his hand. Realization often comes after the damage is done, Ms. Lane. The silence that followed carried the weight of justice itself. What would you do in this moment? Would you stand quietly like Zara or speak boldly like Zoe? Comment below if you believe every child deserves to be treated with fairness. And hit subscribe if you know that respect should never depend on someone's skin color. Patricia could not move. And the twins? They didn't need to say another word. Their truth had already spoken for them. Patricia Lane's throat tightened, though she forced a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dr. Coleman, she began, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to sound composed. I had no idea they were your daughters. If I had known, of course Dr. Elijah Coleman raised a calm hand, silencing her before she could finish. You shouldn't need to know who they belong to before showing them respect. His words were even, steady, but they struck deeper than any shout could have. Patricia swallowed hard, the weight of the room pressing in on her. The other employees behind their desks had gone quiet, some frozen mid-task, pretending to focus on their screens while glancing nervously in her direction. Daniel, the junior teller who had tried to speak up earlier, lowered his gaze but couldn't help a small sigh of relief that someone had finally intervened. Zara stood close to her father, her calm expression unchanged. Zoe, on the other hand, had her lips pressed together so tightly they were turning pale. She wanted to say more, to point out how unfair the whole situation had been, but she stayed still, her father's quiet presence enough to hold her in check. Elijah glanced down at the shredded papers on the counter, the torn scholarship letters that had once represented his daughter's dreams. He didn't reach for them. Instead, he met Patricia's eyes. "You destroyed documents signed by the dean of the university," he said softly. "Without a single verification call. Without a question asked. That's not just unprofessional. That's prejudice." Patricia's cheeks flushed deep red. "I didn't mean." He interrupted her gently. "You meant exactly what you did," he said. "And intent doesn't erase impact." The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. A man in line near the door whispered something under his breath, shaking his head. One woman, holding her purse close, murmured, "Unbelievable." Another whispered to her friend, "She tore up scholarship papers." Imagine that. Daniel stepped forward hesitantly. "Dr. Coleman, sir, I'm sorry for what happened. I tried to stop her. I thought we could verify the documents, but she—" "I know, Daniel," Elijah said, turning to him with a small nod. "And I appreciate that you tried. You did the right thing. Sometimes courage doesn't mean shouting. It means standing still when others move in the wrong direction." Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Patricia looked down at the bin where the torn papers lay, pieces of her mistake staring back like evidence of arrogance. "Please, Dr. Coleman," she said, her tone trembling now, "I can fix this. I'll reprint the forms, apologize to your daughters." Elijah shook his head. "You can't reprint integrity, Ms. Lane. You can only rebuild it, and that takes time." Zoe stepped forward, her small voice steady but sharp. "You called us liars," she said quietly. "You said we didn't belong." Patricia's lips parted, but she found no words. Her earlier confidence had crumbled completely. Zara looked at her sister, then back at Patricia. "We just wanted to open an account," she said softly. "That's all." The quiet in the bank deepened. Every word they spoke now carried weight because everyone listening knew this was more than a bank error. This was about dignity, about the way people are seen before they are even known. Patricia glanced toward her office door, hoping somehow to retreat, but Elijah's calm voice followed her. "Tell me, Ms. Lane," he said, his tone still polite. "If those same documents had been brought in by someone else, someone who looked different, would you have called them fake?" Patricia's lips trembled. I don't know." Elijah nodded slightly. "That's the problem. You should." For a long moment, no one spoke. It wasn't anger that silenced the room, it was shame. Not just Patricia's, but the kind that made everyone reflect on how easily prejudice slips into daily behavior. Elijah finally exhaled slowly and turned to his daughters. "Come, girls," he said gently. "Let's go somewhere our truth is believed before it's questioned." Zara took his hand. Zoe followed, but before leaving she looked back at Patricia. "You said no one important would ever sign our scholarships," she said softly. "You were wrong. He's not just important because of his job. He's important because he teaches people to do better." Patricia looked away. As they turned toward the glass doors, Daniel called after them. "Dr. Coleman?" Elijah paused, turning with calm curiosity. I don't think what happened should stay quiet," Daniel said nervously. "It's not right. The manager shouldn't treat anyone like that." Elijah gave him a long, thoughtful look, then smiled faintly. "Sometimes justice begins with one person deciding silence isn't safe anymore," he said. "Do what your conscience tells you." After they left, Patricia sank into her chair. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pieces of the torn letters, as if somehow reassembling them could undo what had just happened. But every word she'd spoken echoed back louder in her head. "No one important would ever sign a scholarship for you too." Across the lobby, Daniel sat at his desk, his heart pounding. He knew he couldn't just let it go. That evening, he wrote a detailed report to the bank's ethics department, attaching his written statement of what he had witnessed. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because, deep down, he couldn't face the thought of staying quiet any longer. The next morning, the story had already spread through the bank. Whispers filled the air before Patricia even arrived. Some employees avoided her. Others glanced away. Her authority, once taken for granted, now hung in question. Later that afternoon, she received a call from the head office. The conversation was brief, formal, and final. Her conduct was under review. She was to step away immediately, pending investigation. When she hung up, her hands trembled. For the first time, she realized the true cost of her actions. It wasn't just her job. It was the trust she had broken, the unseen wound she had inflicted on two children who had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, at Crestview University, Dr. Coleman sat in his office overlooking the campus lawns, reviewing scholarship reports. Zara and Zoe sat nearby, their books open, quiet and focused. They had said little about what had happened. But sometimes silence carried more meaning than words. Elijah looked up from his papers and smiled at them. "You both handled yourselves with grace," he said softly. "Pride isn't in how loud we speak. It's in how steady we remain when others try to shake us." Zara smiled faintly. Zoe's voice, soft but strong, replied, "It still wasn't right." "No," Elijah agreed. "But sometimes the wrongs we face become lessons others never forget." He leaned back, the late afternoon light softening the room. His daughters had faced humiliation, but they had also revealed something powerful, that dignity could not be torn like paper. What would you do if you were treated unfairly for something you earned? Would you shout back, or hold your silence until the truth revealed itself? Comment below if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect. And hit subscribe if you know that no one's worth should ever be judged by prejudice. Justice didn't roar that day. It spoke in calm tones, walked out quietly through glass doors, and let conscience do the rest. Patricia Lane didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those two girls. One calm and composed, the other fierce with unspoken anger. Their eyes followed her into the quiet of her living room, into the darkness behind her eyelids, into the silence that used to feel peaceful but now pressed down on her chest. She replayed the moment again and again. Her words, her tone, the disbelief she had worn so confidently. She thought of the torn papers in her hands, the sharp sound as she ripped them apart. She had been certain she was right, certain that she was simply doing her job. But now, certainty felt like shame in disguise. The next morning, she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her gray suit jacket. Her reflection looked the same, neat, professional, controlled, but something behind her eyes was different. There was no pride there, no sense of authority. Only the weight of a truth she didn't want to face. When she arrived at the bank, the atmosphere had changed. Conversation stopped as she walked in. A few coworkers nodded politely, others avoided eye contact entirely. Daniel was at his desk, typing quietly. He didn't look up as she passed. The sound of her heels against the tile floor felt louder than usual, sharp, intrusive, uncomfortable. Inside her office, the phone rang almost immediately. She answered quickly, hoping for something routine. Instead, a calm corporate voice informed her that the regional manager would be visiting that afternoon. The tone left no room for questions. Patricia's heart sank. Across town, in the halls of Crestview University, Dr. Elijah Coleman was finishing his morning lecture. Students lingered after class, discussing ideas and theories, unaware of the quiet story unfolding outside those walls. When he finally stepped into his office, he found a message from the bank's head office waiting for him. A formal apology, a request for a meeting, and a promise of appropriate corrective measures. Elijah smiled faintly at the letter. He didn't seek revenge, only understanding. But understanding without accountability meant nothing. Later that day he received another call, not from the bank but from Daniel. The young teller's voice trembled with nerves but carried sincerity. "Dr. Coleman," he said, "I just wanted to tell you." I spoke up. I wrote everything down about what happened. I thought it was the right thing to do. Elijah's tone was warm. You thought right, Daniel. Sometimes doing what's right won't make you popular, but it makes you honorable. Daniel hesitated. Thank you, sir. I just couldn't forget how those girls looked when she tore their papers. It didn't sit right. Justice, Elijah said gently, often begins in discomfort. Back at the bank, Patricia's day dragged on like a slow, unraveling thread. The regional manager, a tall woman with quiet authority, arrived in the early afternoon. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply laid the printed report on Patricia's desk. I've spoken to Dr. Coleman, she said calmly, and I've reviewed Daniel's statement. The incident has already reached our ethics board. Patricia sat very still. I was only trying to protect the bank's integrity, she murmured. The manager's gaze was steady. Integrity isn't destroyed by who walks in. It's destroyed by how we treat them. Patricia looked down, her throat tightening. I didn't realize. The manager interrupted softly. You realized enough to act. And that's what matters. Their father continued to guide them with quiet strength, proud but never boastful. One day, the Mentorship Center organized a community event called Future Scholars. Patricia volunteered to coordinate it, pouring her energy into every detail. The event was sponsored by Crestview University, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Elijah Coleman. When Patricia saw his name on the program, she froze. She had invited many professionals, never imagining he would personally attend. Her heart pounded when she learned he had accepted. The evening of the event, Patricia stood at the entrance, greeting guests. When the Coleman family arrived, she drew a steady breath. Elijah looked as composed as ever, his daughters beside him, taller now, more confident. Zara smiled politely, and Zoe nodded in acknowledgement. You volunteer here now, Elijah said, his voice gentle but meaningful. Yes, Patricia replied softly. I wanted to do something useful. Something right. He gave a slight nod. We all find our way to do that. When the program began, Patricia introduced the evening with a short speech. A year ago, I thought fairness was about following rules, she said. But now I know, it's about seeing people and not judging them. I learned that lesson the hard way, from two remarkable girls who stood where I stand now, with more grace than I ever showed. Then she stepped aside for Dr. Coleman. He spoke to the audience with the calm confidence that came naturally to him. Prejudice doesn't always look like hatred, he said. Sometimes it looks like certainty. It hides in our decisions, in how quickly we assume, in the moments we forget to listen. And it's only when we face those mistakes that we begin to change the world, one interaction at a time. The audience was silent, moved not just by his words but by the quiet strength behind them. Patricia listened from the side, every word a reminder of how far she had come. After the applause, students gathered around Elijah and his daughters, asking questions, taking photos. Patricia stayed back until most had gone, then approached slowly. Dr. Coleman, she said quietly, your words tonight, they meant a lot. Thank you. He smiled kindly. The lesson was yours, Ms. Lane. I only reminded others to learn from it. She nodded, holding back emotion. Do you ever forgive people who make mistakes like mine? Elijah paused. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give once, he said. It's a process. But when someone shows genuine change, forgiveness begins naturally. Zara stepped closer. You seem different, she said softly. Patricia smiled. I hope I am. Zoe studied her for a moment. You sound different too. That's because I finally started listening, Patricia replied. The twins exchanged a small smile, one of quiet understanding. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was peace. Later that evening, as everyone left, Patricia lingered by the door. Elijah stopped as he passed her. You've changed the way you see the world, he said. That's not easy. She nodded. I just wish I had done it sooner. He looked at her thoughtfully. The best time to do right is always now. When they were gone, Patricia stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars shimmered above, distant and still, and she thought of how life had taken her from arrogance to awareness. It wasn't redemption she sought anymore, It was purpose. What would you do if you realized you had been the cause of someone else's pain? Would you hide from it or face it until it changed you? Comment below if you believe that change begins with humility. And hit subscribe if you believe redemption should never be impossible for anyone willing to learn. Because justice isn't just about punishment. It's about awakening. Months rolled quietly into a new year. The mentorship center had grown. More students, more volunteers, more stories of young people defying expectations. Patricia Lane had become one of its most dedicated mentors. The same woman who once tore opportunity apart with her own hands now spent her weekends helping students build theirs. The guilt that had once haunted her was still there, but now it pushed her toward purpose. Zara and Zoe Coleman were thriving. Their names often appeared in local newsletters, celebrated for academic excellence and their calm, inspiring confidence. But the girls hadn't changed who they were. Zara still moved with quiet observation, always writing in her notebooks, and Zoe still spoke with fearless conviction whenever she saw unfairness. Their father continued his work at Crestview, his influence growing not from authority, but from his wisdom and integrity. One morning, Patricia received a call from the Mentorship Center director. "We're organizing a special workshop," he said. "Dr. Coleman is helping to sponsor it and we'd like you to host." Patricia froze. "Me?" "Yes, you," he replied. "You've become one of our strongest mentors. You've earned this." The event, called Opportunity for All, was meant to encourage equal access to education. Patricia worked on every detail with care, ensuring everything was perfectly planned. On the day of the workshop, the center buzzed with energy, students arriving with notebooks, parents chatting quietly, volunteers greeting guests. When the Coleman family walked in, Patricia met them with a steady smile. She didn't feel nervous this time. She felt ready. Zara smiled politely, Zoe gave a brief wave, and Elijah greeted her with genuine warmth. "You've done a good thing here," he said. "I'm trying," Patricia replied softly. During her opening remarks, she stood at the podium, her voice strong but humble. "I used to think that my job was to protect rules," she said. "But rules mean nothing if they're used to hide prejudice. I made a mistake that taught me how easy it is to be blind to someone's worth. I hope today's conversation helps us all see beyond appearances." The room fell silent. The words carried the weight of someone who had lived them. After her speech, Dr. Coleman took the stage. He spoke with calm conviction. "Prejudice can disguise itself as confidence," he said. "It tells us we already know who people are before they even speak. But justice begins when we choose to listen." As he spoke, he gestured slightly toward Patricia, not to shame her but to honor her transformation. "When we recognize our own mistakes and use them to do better, that is the beginning of justice," he continued. The applause was warm, heartfelt. People weren't clapping for perfection. They were clapping for truth. For a long moment, Patricia didn't respond. The air between them hung heavy with the weight of everything that couldn't be undone. When the meeting ended, Patricia was given a suspension letter and a quiet request to vacate her office by the end of the day. Outside in the lobby, Daniel caught her eye as she gathered her things. He didn't smile, but he didn't gloat either. He only nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that truth had its own quiet strength. That evening, Patricia drove home in silence. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the streets in deep orange hues. Her thoughts drifted to the twins again, Zara's quiet strength, Zoe's fierce honesty. She had dismissed them without a glance at their hearts, without even a moment to listen. When she reached home, she sat in her car for a long time before getting out. On the passenger seat sat her phone, the bank's official statement open on the screen. It confirmed her suspension and included an apology to Dr. Coleman and his family, acknowledging the unjust treatment they faced. She sighed, the reality of her actions sinking deeper with every word she read. For years, Patricia had prided herself on being efficient, thorough, and firm but fair. But fairness wasn't something that existed in tone or policy, it existed in how one chose to see others. And she had failed miserably. Across town, Zara and Zoe were at home, sitting with their father in the living room. Zara, the quieter of the two, read from a small notebook where she often wrote down her thoughts. "Dad," she said softly, "why didn't you get angry at her?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Anger is easy, sweetheart. It burns fast and changes little. But calm makes people face themselves." Zoe leaned forward. "But she deserved it. She was so mean." "Yes," Elijah replied gently, "but she also needs to learn. And if I had shouted, she would have heard my anger, not her mistake." The girls sat in silence, absorbing his words. They had seen their father's composure before, but that day in the bank had shown them what real strength looked like. The kind that didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't break. It simply stood firm until truth did the talking. Zara looked thoughtful. "Do you think she'll learn?" Elijah's eyes softened. "I think everyone gets a moment that teaches them who they really are." That was hers. Later that week, the bank released a public apology. The incident, though handled discreetly, reached a few online platforms after an anonymous employee shared a summary post about an act of racial profiling corrected by justice. The story spread quietly, not as gossip but as a conversation. People debated, reflected, and questioned. Daniel was quietly promoted to assistant branch manager within a month. When he received the news, he thought of Dr. Coleman's words, "Justice begins in discomfort." He smiled, realizing how true they were. Patricia, on the other hand, took time away from work. She enrolled in diversity and bias training, not because the bank required it, but because something in her had shifted. She started volunteering at a local youth mentorship program, ironically the same one where Crestview University sponsored scholarships. The first time she saw Zara and Zoe again was months later at a community event. She froze at the sight of them across the room. They were surrounded by friends, laughing easily, free of the weight she had once placed upon them. Patricia hesitated, then slowly approached. The girls noticed her immediately, their expressions cautious. "Ms. Lane," Zara said politely. Patricia took a deep breath. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said softly. "But I do want to say I'm sorry, for how I treated you and for what I assumed." Zoe folded her arms but didn't turn away. "You hurt us," she said honestly. "I know," Patricia whispered. "And I'll carry that with me. But I'm trying to do better. That's all I can promise." Zara studied her quietly. Then with a small nod she said, "Trying is a start." Patricia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She smiled faintly. "You two are remarkable," she said. "You taught me more in one day than I've learned in years." Their father, watching from nearby, said nothing. He simply nodded once as if acknowledging that this too was a kind of justice, the kind that didn't punish but transformed. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it walks softly years later when remorse meets understanding. What would you do if someone who hurt you came back changed? Would you forgive or would you walk away? Comment below if you believe that change begins with accountability. And hit subscribe if you believe justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. Because in the end, the paper could be torn but the truth could not. Months had passed since that afternoon in the bank, but the memory still lived inside Patricia Lane like an echo that refused to fade. Every time she spoke to someone new, she caught herself listening to her own tone, wondering if she sounded like the woman she once was. She had become her own silent monitor, correcting the small assumptions she once made without thinking. She spent most of her weekends volunteering at the Youth Mentorship Center. It wasn't an assignment or a condition of her return to work, it was something she chose. The center focused on helping students from underrepresented communities prepare for college. At first, many of the students didn't trust her. They gave polite answers but kept their distance. Patricia didn't blame them. She simply showed up every week, listened more than she spoke, and helped however she could. Over time, they began to see that she wasn't there for recognition. She stayed late after sessions, helping with essays, checking scholarship forms, and making sure no one's opportunity was overlooked because of how they looked or spoke. Each time she read a name on an application, she thought of Zara and Zoe. Each time a student hesitated to believe in their worth, she heard her own past voice telling them no, and it pushed her to make sure that voice would never win again. Meanwhile, the twins were thriving. At 12, they were already known for their intelligence and teamwork. Their story had quietly inspired a scholarship fund at Crestview for gifted children from diverse backgrounds. Zara remained calm, her wisdom growing beyond her age, while Zoe had become even bolder, speaking publicly about fairness and respect. After the event ended, Patricia helped clean up the room. When she turned, Dr. Coleman was standing beside her. "You spoke well," he said. "Thank you," she replied. "I've realized that silence isn't fairness. It's fear." He nodded. "That's a powerful understanding." She hesitated, her voice softening. "I can't erase what I did to your daughters. But I hope I've learned enough to make sure it never happens again, to anyone." He smiled faintly. "You've shown what growth looks like. That's all anyone can do." As he walked away, Zoe lingered behind. "Miss Lane?" she said. Patricia turned. "Yes." Zoe looked thoughtful. "When you tore those letters, I was so angry. But now I think maybe people really can change if they want to." Patricia's eyes softened. "I hope so. Because change is the only apology that lasts." Zara joined them, smiling quietly. "Then you've already apologized." Patricia blinked back emotion. "You two have taught me more than you'll ever know." When the Colemans left, Patricia remained by the doorway, looking out over the empty hall. The tables were scattered with papers and name tags, reminders of a day that had once seemed impossible for her to face. She picked up a leftover flyer that read, "See beyond the surface." It felt like a message meant for her. That evening, she sat at her desk and began drafting a new program proposal. It would train local business professionals on equality and empathy, built around real stories of bias and redemption. She titled it, "The Quiet Power of Change." When she finished, she sent a copy to Dr. Coleman for review, adding a short message. "Justice isn't about what I lost, it's about what I've learned. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn." A few days later he replied with just 3 words, "You've made progress." What would you do if you were given a chance to rewrite your mistake? Not erase it, but turn it into something good. Comment below if you believe redemption is real. And hit subscribe if you believe justice isn't about payback, it's about lasting change. For Patricia Lane, justice wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of who she became. Weeks passed after the Opportunity for All event, and life found a quiet rhythm again. The Mentorship Center continued to grow, alive with the sound of young people dreaming without fear. Patricia Lane was now one of the faces of that hope. Her presence steady, her words sincere, her heart open. The same woman who once doubted 2 young girls now guided dozens with patience and empathy. But her transformation wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about awareness. She had learned to see the world differently, to hear hesitation in people's voices and understand where it came from. The mistake that once shamed her had become her teacher. At Crestview University, Dr. Elijah Coleman had been working on a new initiative, an annual ethics and leadership seminar for community leaders. When Patricia received his invitation to speak at the event, she was stunned. "Are you sure you want me there?" she asked over the phone. "Yes," Elijah said. "Because real ethics isn't theory. It's experience. My students need to hear what accountability sounds like." When the day came, Patricia stood backstage at the lecture hall, nervous but determined. The audience was full, students, professors, and guests. Dr. Coleman introduced her not as a former bank manager, but as a mentor and speaker who had learned the hard way what prejudice costs. When she stepped to the podium, the room went still. She didn't start with a prepared speech. She spoke from the heart. "I used to think fairness meant being strict and professional," she said. "But I've learned that fairness without empathy is just control. A year ago, I tore apart 2 young girls' dreams because of what I believed they couldn't be. Today I stand here because those same girls and their father showed me what real dignity looks like." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "Justice didn't destroy me. It reshaped me. I learned that doing what's right isn't about punishment, it's about reflection, about becoming someone who can see beyond bias." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy with emotion. Dr. Coleman rose after her and spoke calmly. "We speak often about justice as if it's a battle," he said. "But sometimes it's a lesson. The power of justice is not in humiliation, it's in awakening. And what Ms. Lane has done is proof that awakening is possible for anyone willing to listen. The applause that followed filled the hall. Students stood, clapping not just for the story, but for the truth it carried. Patricia's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She bowed her head, grateful for grace she had never expected. Afterward, students gathered around her with questions. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others admitted they saw themselves in her past, quick to judge, slow to understand. She spoke with each one, patient and kind, knowing that every word she said mattered now more than ever. Later, outside on the campus steps, the Coleman family joined her. The setting sun painted everything gold and a warm breeze stirred the leaves. Zara smiled up at her. "You spoke really well." "Thank you," Patricia said softly. "It means a lot coming from you." Zoe tilted her head. "So, do you forgive yourself now?" Patricia paused. "Not completely. But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's something you practice every day." Elijah placed a hand on his daughter's shoulders. "And sometimes," he said, "the people we forgive become the ones who teach others how to change." They all stood for a moment, the silence between them calm, not awkward. It was the kind of quiet that comes after healing. As the Colemans walked away, Patricia stayed for a while, looking at the university building, the very institution whose name she had once doubted belonged on two little girls' scholarship letters. Now it stood as a reminder that growth could be just as powerful as justice itself. That night, Patricia wrote in her journal, "Justice is not revenge. It's the restoration of dignity, to others and to ourselves. Those girls I once doubted are the reason I believe in second chances. And the man I once disrespected showed me that calm truth is stronger than loud anger." At the same time, in another room of their home, Zara wrote in her notebook, "Dignity isn't given. It's carried, *." She showed it to her sister. Zoe smiled. "You think Ms. Lane finally gets that now?" Zara nodded. "I think she does." They turned off the light, the words lingering in the stillness like a promise. What would you do if the world gave you power to choose between vengeance and grace? Would you destroy or would you teach? Comment below if you believe grace can be powerful. And hit subscribe if you believe justice isn't always loud. It's sometimes calm, dignified, and quietly unforgettable. Because true justice isn't about who wins. It's about who learns. And that day everyone did.